back to Activity Quest, the podcast that's packed with stuff to do. In this week's episode, Dan is chatting with Indy from the RSPB about the Big Garden Birdwatch that's happening soon. Plus, Adam's going bird spotting himself. My name's Bex, and every week we go up and down the country on the quest for something epic. This week, Dan is chatting to Indy about a very special event taking place on the 24th to the 26th of January. That's this coming weekend. It's the RSPB's Big Garden Birdwatch, so let's find out more.
Now, the Big Garden Birdwatch is the world's largest garden wildlife survey. Every year, hundreds of thousands of nature lovers are taking part. You could do it this year as well and help to build a picture of how our garden birds are doing across the UK. Let's find out more with Indy Keemel-Green from the RSPB. Indy, thanks so much for being there. So over 600,000 people took part in the Big Garden Birdwatch last year. What did we discover?
Thank you so much for having me. Very happy to be here. So, one of the very interesting things, like you say, with such an amazing amount of people taking part, 600,000, with those sort of numbers of people taking part, we get a really good idea of what's going on in our gardens with our bird, with our wildlife, which is obviously the whole aim of this Big Garden Birdwatch. So thank you so much to everybody who took part. And looking forward to see how many people take part this year. But one of the interesting things that we saw last year was that the house sparrow, which has been ranked number one for the Big Garden Birdwatch for the last 20 years, was still number one last year, even though they've declined by over 60% since the Big Garden Birdwatch began in 1979. So it's really interesting, the fact that, just shows how many of those birds that we have, yet they're still declining. So we need to do everything we can to keep them at number one and actually reverse that decline.
So the house sparrow is number one, perhaps expected though, if it is normally around the top spot. What is something perhaps more surprising that we learned through last year's Big Garden Birdwatch?
Well, something more surprising that I really enjoyed seeing was the arrival of waxwings. And it was really cool because we have, the waxwings, they look a bit like they're about the same size as a blackbird, but 10 times more colourful. They've got amazing red, yellow and orange and black features. They're absolutely stunning birds. And they fly over here to basically spend the winter in the UK and Europe, from Scandinavia, to have a slightly warmer winter. And they feed on berries. And we often see them in supermarket car parks feeding on rowan berries that are often planted there. And many of us are also lucky enough to see them in our garden. And in 2024, last year, we counted 1,722 waxwings in our gardens and local green spaces, which is the highest number since 2017. So that was really cool because they have what's called these influx years, where sometimes if there's enough food on the continent, they'll just stay there. But if they're short of food there, then we get more birds coming over to the UK and Europe. And that's exactly what we saw last year. So that was a really nice surprise for us all.
So is it a really thought-through decision on behalf of these birds? If they're a bit low on food, will they think, all right, well, there's nothing here, let's go and see what the UK has to offer? Are they all thinking that at the same time?
It's pretty hard to get into the mind of them, but that's definitely what we're seeing. So this year we knew that, there's been one or two waxwings reported in the UK this winter. So we definitely know that, we'll be lucky to see any on our Big Garden Birdwatch this year. I believe it kind of is sort of a herd mentality, a group decision, when they all realise that either the temperatures have dropped so low that they're not adapted to put up with it, or they've simply eaten through all of their food stocks. And, it's also down to the habitat as well. If the spring, with climate change, we're seeing our seasons being thrown off a little bit. If the spring wasn't quite as good, or if there was a bit of a drought over in some areas, then those fruiting trees might not have had a great spring, so they might not have much fruit on them for the birds. Then there'll be less food there naturally. So it's a lot of factors that can lead up to birds coming over here or not. It's really interesting to see what knock-on effects bring birds here.
Well, as you mentioned, the climate crisis, that's throwing our seasons off. As we are speaking, it feels through January, there's been maybe the coldest time in the history of humanity ever. But we know that last year was, I think, the hottest year on record, they were reporting, the scientists, that is. So what impacts is that having towards the number of birds and the type of birds that we are seeing through the UK?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think that, yeah, obviously climate change, as you mentioned, is having a real impact on our seasons and them not being as predictable as they used to be. And I'd say so far we're having a really good winter. We're having what sort of a winter that I remember. I'm only 19 now, but it's so I haven't got a lot to compare it to. Obviously, we're seeing. I saw a Met Office map the other day showing the loss of snow that we've had across the UK in certain areas, and my area where I live in Shelford Forest is definitely seeing far less snow than it used to even 10, 20 years ago. So you could argue that gives species maybe a slightly better chance of survival if it's actually warmer in the winter. But then obviously, we get these. I remember a few springs ago when all our swallows and swifts and our summer migratory birds started arriving, and we suddenly get a big cold snap in April. All of a sudden, it's like, well, they aren't evolved to put up with that, so some of them won't make it, and the food won't be available there to them. So there's definitely lots and lots of negatives, as well as maybe a few positives, but ultimately the throwing off of our seasons. A lot of what we see in the breeding season is that it's so meticulously timed and so timed out with birds like blue tits, for example, that we see in our gardens. They time the hatching of their chicks to be the emergence of a certain caterpillar species that lives on oak trees, and that is what they'll feed their chicks primarily. But obviously, if those oak trees are behind because of maybe it's cold or they haven't had enough water, or any sort of factor that's delaying their fruiting essentially, or the leaves coming out, then that could then have a detrimental impact on those caterpillars and then the blue tits. So yeah, it's really tricky, and it's getting, I think, very difficult for birds to predict what's going on. But I think what we've seen with some birds like blue tits and grey tits is that they've started laying their eggs or building their nests. I think it's something like 10 days earlier than normal in recent years, just to try and get ahead of the game. So yeah, they're really having to adapt, birds at the moment. They can't sort of have a think about it. They're really on edge.
So the Big Garden Birdwatch last year, over 600,000 people took part, counted almost 10 million birds. Tell us more about the actual Birdwatch this year. What do we need to do? How can we help out and get involved?
Yeah, exactly. So the Big Garden Birdwatch this year, we want it to be bigger and better as ever. All the information's on the RSPB website, and all it requires you to do is spend an hour of your time between the 26th and 29th of January. And that could be in your garden, overlooking a balcony, in your local green space, and simply counting the birds you see. And if you're not sure what some of the species might be, there's some really helpful wild bird ID guides on the RSPB website to get you familiar with some of the birds you're likely to see, some of our more common garden or urban birds. And it's really important that you only count the highest number of any species you see at one time. So if you see a blue tit coming into your garden and then it disappears, and then in a moment, and then you see another blue tit come in, that's not two blue tits, that's still just one. But if you see, say, 3 blue tits at once, then that's your highest count. And then you'd need to see 4 blue tits at once for that to be your highest count, if that makes sense. You can't count birds flying over. They have to be on the ground or in a tree using that natural space that you're monitoring. But it's, I absolutely genuinely love taking part, because, I love bird watching as a hobby anyway, but sort of having, your bird watching time spent usefully and having an hour dedicated, right, I'm not doing anything else. No one can talk to me. No one can contact me. I'm doing the Big Garden Birdwatch. I have to look at my garden, and just in case I miss anything. So I really, really love it. And it's great to have a little hot chocolate and get a chair up with the binoculars and just chill out and watch some birds for an hour. It's absolutely lovely. So please take part.
It's just 1 hour between the 24th and the 26th of January. You can find out more at rspb.org.uk. Now, Indy, as I said, last year, 600,000 people took part. You're getting all that information. How on earth do the RSPB figure out how many birds are in the UK and what they're doing and what strange species we've got with all that information? It must be a lot of work you have to do after that weekend.
It is a lot of work. And the results come out in the following months. And it's definitely, it feels like, sort of counting ballots after an election. There's a lot of data to get through. And there's so many Sorry, yeah, I'm very glad. I do not envy the people who have to count up all these results. But yeah, it's amazing. And obviously, once we find out these results, the RSPB's been monitoring trends of the declines and increases in some cases of these birds, and then we can figure out a plan of action to how to intervene and which birds to help and how we can do that. So yeah, they do some brilliant work with that data. Obviously, getting that data definitely takes a while. So they do a really good job of it.
Now, Indy, you're 19 years old, and you are chatting to me on behalf of the RSPB. You've mentioned how much you love bird watching, and this is kind of what you get to do now. How have you gone from someone that likes looking at birds out of the window to now doing it at 19 years old, working with the RSPB? It's such a big rise and something you're so passionate about.
Yeah, it's been really fun. I mean, I grew up in the middle of Sherwood Forest in Nottinghamshire. And when I was 14, in 2018, the RSPB took over Sherwood Forest to manage the forest, for the wildlife and people. And I was 14 at the time, and I was encouraged to, just go and have a chat with them. I remember always meeting similar people at their pin badge stalls when I've got a collection, I've got hundreds of little RSPB pin badges, which I love collecting. And I know many other people are much more serious about it than me, but I was just sort of, collecting the pretty ones. And I eventually got chatting to a few people who still work there, and they were saying, do you volunteer with us at all? And I was like, no, I didn't know you could. And I started off in the Sherwood Forest Visitor Centre, just helping greet people because I knew the forest quite well and just advising them, which walks were lovely and, all this jazz to try and help them, have a good day in the forest. And then I got invited to do guided walks of the forest and talks, and also volunteer on the RSPB on their work parties. So that's carrying out practical conservation on site. So volunteering with them, which I still do now, is so much fun. I'm doing it tomorrow, in fact, on Tuesday, and it's genuinely always my favourite day of the week. It's such a wonderful, lovely group of people, a group of volunteers led by RSPB staff member, and the work we carry out is fantastic, and it's always so effective. We had a walk round just after New Year's Day, obviously very recently, and we had a walk around some of the areas that we'd done work in 2024, and seeing how it's changed and seeing which species are taken hold in there. And I cannot tell you, there's no more satisfying feeling when you've, say, cleared an area of trees to expose a little glade, or, disturbed a bit of earth to allow some certain beetles and bee species to inhabit there. And seeing that they've used it is so satisfying. And yeah, I mean, there's so much, as we all know, there's so much doom and gloom with climate change and biodiversity loss. And, it's a very real threat, and we all need to genuinely, take it very seriously. But then being able to actually sort of do our bit to counteract it and see it working, just makes you really happy. And being able to do this, I think, it's obviously, there's so many barriers for people to be able to volunteer. I'm very lucky that I live next to Sherwood Forest. But obviously, if you don't have a reserve near to you that you can't access easily, then it can be tricky. But I know the RSPB is working on that to try and get more people involved. But if you do happen to live near a reserve, not just RSPB, it could be any other, wildlife charity organisation, then please get involved. There'll always be something for you to volunteer or do. And it's so satisfying, and just know that you'd be doing a great thing. And chances are you'd be doing it with some pretty good people too. So get involved.
The Big Garden Birdwatch is happening between the 24th and the 26th of January 2025. All it needs is an hour for you to look at some birds outside your window. Find out more, get to rspb.org.uk. Indy Keemall-Green, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. Take part.
Thanks, Dan. Find out more by searching for RSPB Big Garden Birdwatch. Now, time for something else. Every week we're heading into the great outdoors to find something that you can only spot at this time of year. And we're staying on the bird theme. This week, a feathered friend that you can spot in your garden all year round.
Winter brings a quiet stillness to the woods, but not all is silent. One bird, with its bright red breast and cheerful song, stands out against the frosty backdrop. Today, we're talking about robins with the help of Rob Jakes from the British Trust for Ornithology.
I work for the British Trust for Ornithology as a training officer, so my job is to help people learn how to identify birds. Ornithology is the study of birds. So anything involving looking into birds, how they live, how they're related to one another, why their numbers might be going up or down, all falls under ornithology.
Robins are such familiar birds, aren't they, with their round little bodies and striking red breasts. They're a favourite in the UK. Rob explains what makes them so special.
Robins are relatively small birds. They're quite round, especially at this time of year when they're all fluffed up. They have like a light tan brown back, a pale belly, but what they're most known for is their bright red breast, hence robin redbreast.
Now, as we all know, robins have a really strong connection to Christmas. You might have seen them on greetings cards, maybe on TV, but they're actually found throughout the year.
They're a resident species. They breed in the UK, so you can find them in the spring, the summer, the autumn and the winter.
Not only are robins iconic, but they're also bold little birds. You might have seen one hopping right up to you in the garden. Rob, why are they so confident?
They're also a very confiding birds. They will happily come up to people. They're not shy. If you're in the garden digging around, it's not unusual for a robin to come up, see what you're doing, see if they can maybe get a worm. So they're really comfortable people, and during the winter time even more so. So not only do we have the cultural association, but we also have that these birds are really obvious during the winter time.
But don't let their sweet looks fool you. These birds are famously territorial.
They can be very aggressive. They're these really kind-looking birds with these nice big black eyes, and they look very, very sweet. But they're very territorial. They have to keep their territories, and they do this over the winter. They do it by a lot of singing. But if a bird appears in their territory that they don't know and they don't like it, they will attack it. And there's been experiments in the past where people have made fake birds. They've stuck them near bird feeders within the robin's territory, put a red spot on the front of it, and the resident robin will come up and hammer away at it because it does not like this fake bird. It's too similar to another robin, and they want it out of their territory.
Robins are also one of the few birds that sing in winter. Rob explains why they do this and how you can recognise their song.
So there's a handful of birds that will sing throughout the winter. So blackbirds and song thrushes, they'll be really vocal in the winter, and robin is another one of those. I even heard one last night. There's a storm going on, loads of wind, loads of rain, but still there was a little gap in the middle of the night, and a robin just piped up in the middle of it just to have a little song. So they do this largely to keep this territory over the winter. So then it'll merely be the males singing, and they'll be holding this territory. So when the females return in the spring, they've got this territory already set up, and they've got it established so they can breed and have their next generation of robins. Most birds will sing most during the spring and summer months, particularly in the spring. But all of them have some kind of difference. They all have different songs to advertise to one another so that they can tell different species apart. And so it creates this soundscape, and robin is a really good one to learn at this time of year where it's nice and quiet. They have this trilling call where it starts really, really like tight, and they kind of build up the confidence, and then they lose the confidence as they get towards the end. So they're a really interesting bird, and a great one to learn to listen out for, because you'll hear them so much during this time of year.
So the next time that you hear the soft, cheerful song of a robin, take a moment to enjoy it. These little birds with their bold personalities and bright red chests are a beautiful reminder that life is all around us, even in the quiet of winter.
Thanks, Adam. OK, that's all we've got for you today. I'm Bex, and this has been a podcast from the UK's children's radio station, Fun Kids. Listen to me on your DAB digital radio, online, on the free Fun Kids mobile app, and on your smart speaker. Just say, play Fun Kids every weekday from 4 p.m. See you soon.